But there is definitely a feeling that like the things have just not quite fallen right for this franchise, and there's a lot of disillusioned fans over the years who've become pretty numb to the team now and the way it works. You get a little bit excited in preseason, people start to buy into the PR, and then the season starts, and then people quickly lose interest. I think alongside that, you have the LaMelo fans, who will claim that it is all a conspiracy against LaMelo to succeed. The team don't really want him to succeed. They want to trade him. He should be in LA. He should go somewhere else. And they often, bump heads against the probably more grounded Hornets fans, because that kind of stuff I subscribe is just kind of ridiculous. So that still also creates some friction.
He is a NBA journalist that covers the Charlotte Hornets for Culture. We welcome James Plowright onto Hoopsology. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. Our show covers the latest NBA and WNBA topics, and we love to cover each and every NBA team since the history of our show. So you're the first journalist we've had on that's covered the Charlotte Hornets. So thanks for making the time. It's a franchise we've been very curious about. So let's hop into it, what they're doing now in the present in 2025. So as a recording of this podcast, the Hornets are 8-27. This seems like they are rebuilding, retooling. I've watched some of your previous content in terms of what they're planning for the future, but focused on this season in particular, your expectations going in to this season. Have they met them? Have they not? Have they been a disappointment? Can you kind of just set the stage for how the Hornets are performing now compared to just your original thoughts and impressions earlier in the season?
Yeah, well, this might be the first time you've had someone on cover the Hornets, but honestly, you could probably copy and paste this podcast for the last 3 years, and it's the same thing, which is a lot of injuries, which have basically not allowed the actual lineup that you want to see if you're a Charlotte Hornets fan or journalist play a lot of minutes. And also on top of that, a lot of losses, because they're playing a lot of guys who haven't been ready. And you can copy and paste for the last 3 years, and that's happened again. Look, I think the last 2 years before this one, they did have higher expectations. They were, hoping to get back to that kind of play-in level, maybe push for the playoffs. They had veterans like Terry Rozier, PJ Washington, Gordon Hayward. And they realized, with new ownership coming in, new front office coming in, 2 years, which were kind of lost, partly due to injuries, but also partly just those pieces not quite being able to stay healthy and play well enough together. That team wasn't going anywhere, and they traded a lot of those pieces away last trade deadline. And this year was always a rebuilding year. You might say the Hornets were already rebuilding, but it was a rebuild on the rebuild, because the Hornets owe a lottery-protected 2025 first-round pick to the San Antonio Spurs, dating back to the Kai Jones trade, which was pretty horrendous, but at least it was lottery-protected. So this was always a year where they did not want to lose their first-round pick in this stacked draft. So did they quite expect to be this bad? Probably not. And I think injuries have affected that, but also there's been some disappointments as well. But they were never pushing for the playoffs this year. This was part of the plan, although they might be a little bit further from the path that they maybe thought.
So what is their, trajectory, compared to other rebuilds within the NBA? Because I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, within recent years, we've seen a lot of teams, try rebuilds have been successful. The Houston Rockets have been successful. Even the process with the 76ers, they have been in contention. We've OKC, the Timberwolves, we've seen them, a lot of these rebuilds bear fruit in terms of at least playoff success or being a contender. Even you can mention even the Cavaliers at this point, that the way they're dominating the NBA. So with the Hornets, what is it going to take for them to get to that point to be successful on their rebuild?
Well, you're absolutely right, Justin. They've been lapped by a lot of teams who were good, went to rebuild, and then have got good again, while the Hornets have just been glued towards the bottom of the standings, apart from those two outlier kind of COVID-affected years where LaMelo Ball was rookie and sophomore, and they were that really fun league pass sensation, young and up-and-coming team. And then, nobody could have seen what's happened the last 3 years of regression from that point. The thinking was it's only going to go up from here, right? what do they need to move forward? It's a great question. I think for a long time, this team has lacked a element of like toughness. They've been easy to play against. Defensively this year, they've actually improved, but still, like you look at their best two players, which are LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, they are jump shooters, right? They are guys who fray away from contact, aren't great defenders, and at the end of the day, they want to get an open shot, basically. And that's great when you've got someone who's, drawing doubles and breaking teams down and creating that. But they haven't really got anyone around that. And LaMelo Ball, I think, although he's shown potential at times, there's just too much naivety and inefficiency in his game right now to carry a team by himself to be that kind of competitive level. They're definitely better when he's out on the floor. He's not someone who makes them worse as he plays, like some people have tried to say. They are 100 times better when he plays. But are they good enough with the surrounding talent? Probably not. And I think what this team really needs is to get one more big foundational piece, which hopefully they'll get in this year's draft. If they can get a top 5 pick, that would be brilliant. And from there, I really think they will then be looking to try and use some of these draft assets they've gathered in the recent few years. They gathered 6 second-round picks in the summer through various trades using their cap space to build future draft capital. They added 2 first-round picks at last year's trade deadline from Miami and Dallas, and they've also got a full closet of their own future firsts as well. So I think from this season, it'll be about, okay, can we now start putting together some of these, draft packages and start trying to make some more aggressive moves to actually get better? Because they've not made an aggressive win now trade really since Montrezl Harrell at the trade deadline in like 2021. That might have been 2022. So they've been moving in essentially the opposite direction. So that's what I would expect them to see, is to play this year out, add a big time talent in the draft. You then hopefully have a core that complements each other in Ball, Miller, and whoever they add, ideally Cooper Flag. And then you start to build a team around those three, which actually complements them, which is something that they have failed to do. They've had 2 small guard lineups. They've had a lack of rim protection behind bad perimeter defense. They've not had a team that makes sense on paper. And that's what they need to start working towards. But you need to know who your core guys are before you start to do that.
So 2 follow-ups to what you said. First, in terms of the draft, my other co-host, he was very curious about the previous draft, 2024 draft for the Hornets, and the pick that they made. It seemed like it caused some shockwaves. Can you allude to that in terms of why they went in that direction, and do you think that's going to bear fruit in the future?
Well, it certainly shocked me. Kristen Peak before the draft, former analyst for Yahoo Sports, tweeted that the Hornets had interest in Tidjane Salaün. That was the first that I'd even considered they would take Tidjane Salaün at that moment. I had a long list of 14 guys, and he was the last one on my long list. So I certainly didn't see it coming. Why did they take Tidjane Salaün? I think it was a couple of things. They have their high usage offensive players in Ball and Miller. Or at least they saw in this draft. There wasn't anyone that they're drafting to kind of really of the caliber of those two, which I agree with. So I think they did try and focus on, well, we're not going to try and add like a super high upside guy who has the ball a lot. Can we add someone who complements the pieces around the team? Salaün is a 6'10" shooter. Charles Lee's system that they're bringing in is heavily predicated on shooting the ball from beyond the arc, and he's shown some real flashes. The percentages aren't great, but if you actually watch the film, he shoots a really nice ball. He shoots it from super deep. And he's the youngest player not on a 2-way contract in the NBA right now. So he's very much a project. Again, I think this speaks to this upcoming year was never a year that they were really pushing for. Like, why take Dalton Connect when you're going to suck in 2025, 26? And you might be 3 or 4 years away from being ready to kind of compete at the highest level. And I think they felt they could have the patience with Salaün. The second aspect is this new front office led by Jeff Peterson, who came from the Brooklyn Nets, is very much placing a heavy emphasis on your competitive spirit, your maturity, your practice habits, and your professionalism. And everything that we've heard and seen out of Tidjane Salaün says he's just a crazy, crazy work ethic guy, and plays with a fire and a physicality and an energy. and it's not always pretty or in control, but it's there, and you don't have to be a guy to like, hey, you need to get in the gym. Hey, you need to give us more in defense. Hey, your motor needs to run more hot. And that is one thing that he brings, and I think he really fits their philosophy of what they call Hornets DNA, of what they're looking for in a player. So that's something we have to keep in mind looking into the next draft cycle too, is if there's someone where it's like, he kind of plays defense when he wants and, not great things heard off the court, cross that name out for the Hornets to draft. They're not going near them. They're not making the James Bucknight mistake again.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the second question I had to your earlier point was LaMelo Ball. Very polarizing player, has a hit single out now, seems to be gone viral.
That's Enjoy Ball, his brother.
It was his brother.
It's Jello. It's Jello Ball who has the hit single. Not
my mistake. Okay, because they're playing the Hornets locker room. I get confused. So can you explain with LaMelo? Certainly he is flashy. I've seen just the kind of the videos. Just in terms of outside of the court, but on the court, it seems like he has a lot of potential. Certainly the entire family. Very polarizing in terms of before they got to the NBA. But I have to say they have at least exceeded my expectations for what they're able to do, especially with Lonzo. I'm a huge Bulls fan, so I'm a big fan of Lonzo Ball in particular. But with LaMelo, what is kind of your feelings on him? Because I understand what you're saying about him being a jump shooter, but he seems to have kind of this flair to be, I don't know, like an elite player in this league. But from what you're telling me, I don't think he's got the chops for it. So from your perspective, is it possible to build a team around him just in terms of other pieces, or do you think he's a supplemental piece and it might be time to kind of, move in a different direction?
He's a mercurial talent and a mercurial personality. He's not your typical NBA player when you hear him interviewed, when you see how he plays. He calls himself one of one, and I think people sometimes from the outside view that as arrogance. But I kind of actually think he is one of one just because I've never seen someone with his approach and mindset. And that doesn't help him always. Like with the media, he is terrible. He gives them nothing, deadpans them.
A quick timeout from the interview to request a favor. If you love our interviews, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like this video to hear more interviews from the world of basketball, featuring journalists from SB Nation, ESPN, CBS Sports, and The Athletic. Now, back to the interview.
And when you have media covering the league, he doesn't help himself. He's not a very good PR person for himself. But then, connected to that, he's one of the most popular NBA players amongst casual NBA League Pass fans. He just leading the East for votes, for fan votes and guards. And I can tell you right now, most of the NBA media is not going to have LaMelo Ball on the ballot because they don't like his turnovers, his early shot clock attempts, where he doesn't pass the ball. They view him as a bit selfish, as not a serious basketball player. And there is some truth within that. He definitely has a careless nature at times, which looks like he's playing for fun, not to win. But equally, the numbers don't lie. The Hornets are 12 points better off when LaMelo Ball plays on the court. And their record with LaMelo Ball in the lineup and without is starkly different. They are just below a 500 team, basically, with LaMelo over the last 4 or 5 years. But I completely understand when you watch the film, every single night I watch LaMelo, there's about 4 or 5 times where I go, what are you doing? And it goes in, or he creates an assist. And then there's 4 or 5 times where I go, what are you doing? And he misses, and it looks terrible. And I really do think whatever you want to see with LaMelo, you can. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think he has exceptional talent. I do think he has the talent to have a team built around him, but only if his game matures and he improves on some of his main issues, like over-aggressive fouling, turnovers, trying to be more efficient, taking better shots. He never used to be this high-volume shot chucker. Chucker's too harsh of a word, but he never used to be a super high-volume shooter. He was always a pass-first point guard, and he's kind of reverted to being more of a scorer than a creator. Now, maybe that's because of the players around him this year, because there isn't a lot of scoring on this team at the moment, partly because of the injuries. But the last couple of years when he's played, even though he's not played many games, he's kind of played this similar style. So I would like to see him reining it in a little bit and playing a more balanced game. And that's what I would like to see from him. If he does that, I think you can build around him. If he doesn't, then I think he is more of a, you know, he's not the guy that you want to be relying on night to night because you just don't know what you're going to get.
No, that makes sense. I want to transition to the fan base of the Charlotte Hornets. We always like to delve into every NBA team in regards to what makes them special and distinct compared to other teams within the NBA. Can you kind of give kind of your perspective in terms of the feedback you receive from your content among other Hornets fans, just in terms of the relationship they have with the team? Is it any different than other NBA teams? Like, what makes it distinct, or is it kind of par for the course in terms of NBA fandom?
Well, that's a lot of disillusioned Hornets fans, as you can probably imagine, with the lack of relevance, success, and like just bad luck this team have had over the years. Like, going back to the injuries over the last 3 years, going back to the year that the cap spiked, and you remember the Warriors signed Kevin Durant. Well, that was also the year that they had like Nick Batum, Marvin Williams become free agents, and they ended up having to pay them like a absolutely huge overpay because they had to retain them because they were coming off their good year. If that had happened any other year, not on the cap spike, like that put this franchise back for 3 or 4 years. They've had bad lottery luck, missed out on Anthony Davis, got Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, got down to the last two to get Victor Wembanyama, ended up with Brandon Miller, actually jumped up in that draft, so they were lucky. But there is definitely a feeling that like the things have just not quite fallen right for this franchise. And there's a lot of disillusioned fans over the years. You've become pretty numb to the team now, and the way it works, you get a little bit excited in preseason, people start to buy into the PR, and then the season starts, and then people quickly lose interest. I think alongside that, you have the LaMelo fans, who, will claim that it is all a complete, it's a conspiracy against LaMelo to succeed. The team don't really want him to succeed. They want to trade him. He should be in LA. He should go somewhere else. And they often, bump heads against the probably more grounded Hornets fans because that kind of stuff I subscribe is just kind of ridiculous. So that still also creates some friction. But, I know a lot of season ticket holders. I mean, I don't live in America. It won't surprise anyone to hear. I live in Manchester, UK. But I've covered the team for the best part of 15 to 20 years now. Um, I know a lot of season ticket holders, and even those who've gone through all these bad seasons are feeling like, where is the light at the end of the tunnel? So I think even with the new takeover, the new coach, the new ownership, this season, people were kind of hoping it would be different, even though I kind of knew it wasn't going to be. But I do understand from a fan perspective, you think, oh, there's a lot of change. Like, this could be better, and we could be healthy. And what will this team look like when they're healthy? And so far, they've still looked not great.
So I want to talk about this, the team, different team aspects in particular, just kind of the Hornets uniforms. Another question from one of my co-hosts that, very popular, even their core, kind of their branding, very distinct compared to the rest of the NBA. What are kind of your thoughts on that in terms of how they're able to brand themselves despite them not being relevant in terms of being a contender, and their evolution from being the Bobcats in the previous era of Michael Jordan, trying to kind of get out of that shadow and establish kind of a new legacy just in terms of their entire brand? We've seen teams adapt kind of, I don't know, I won't call them gimmicks, but certainly things that make them unique. The thing that comes to mind is Sacramento with like the beam, just kind of different things to different teams kind of associated with them. So with the Hornets, I think their uniforms and kind of their color scheme, I think it makes them stand out despite them not performing on the court. Can you just talk about kind of, other aspects of the team not related to their success that draws a connection to their fan base?
Yeah, well, I'm in a minority where I started following the team when they were the Bobcats and after the Adam Morrison draft. So when the Bobcats left, I was a little bit sad because I'd only ever known the Bobcats. I didn't follow the Hornets in the 90s and the 80s. Back in the day, I was too young. I wasn't born actually for some of that. So I'm definitely in a minority. Look, the North America and Charlotte in general definitely loved the Hornets brand. I agree, it is pretty powerful. I think everything does look cool, and if they had an exciting team, like I say, we did see it for those 2 years when they made the play-in with LaMelo Ball, and they were looking really exciting. Like it was a buzz, and people were talking, and everyone was saying about how great everything looked. So, but ultimately, like none of that matters if on the court your team is a joke. And in the eyes of most NBA fans, they have been. It's a little bit like the Bulls. You follow the Bulls, right? That Bulls brand is so powerful and strong. It's recognized all over the world. And even in this country, I see loads of Bulls gear because of Michael Jordan. But like it won't kind of, it will always lie dormant and it will always be there, but it will really come to life if there is success. And people will buy back in really quickly. And I think the Hornets have some of that, but like those 80s, 90s teams, they're a long time ago now, right? This team needs to start building some of its own history, because the nostalgia that they lean into with Muggsy Bogues and Alonzo Mourning and Grandmama, that's great. But the people that that's relevant to is just going down and down and down every year. So they need to find a way to engage the kind of the newer, younger fans.
Do you have a all-time favorite, just Charlotte franchise lineup that you've kind of placed in your mind in terms of kind of in America, kind of we call everything a Mount Rushmore, like the top. It's a great players.
Look, Kemba Walker's the first name on there. Not just for his play on the court, but speak to anyone around that franchise in that fan base. One of the best human beings to play for the franchise, and like I'm someone that I care about, like the human behind the basketball player. So that's a big one for me. I'd probably go Gerald Wallace next. Crash from the Bobcats. Have to have one Bobcat on there at least. First All-Star as a Bobcat, was in the dunk contest, and like was just like a really interesting two-way player. He was a lot of fun to watch. Where do I go next? That's a great question. I'm going to throw Del Curry on, because even though he was kind of only a role player in Charlotte, he's just been connected with the franchise for so long. He's the play-by-player, he's the color commentator, for the broadcast team. He played there for 16 seasons, I think it was. He leads the franchise in a bunch of categories, although Kemba's taken some of those. So I think he has to make it. For most people, they would probably have, Muggsy Bogues or some other older Hornets on. I'm gonna stay away from that, I think. You know what? A guy I always found really interesting, and this people are going to laugh. Bismack Biyombo.
Okay.
Who was drafted by the then Bobcats. Just like, again, incredible human being. Like, if there was someone I could invite to dinner just to speak to all night, done loads of work developing, his home nation of the Congo, speaks like 5-6 languages. I think he's vice president of the Players Association as well. And just like has an infectious personality and just super interesting guy. And then the last one, that's a really good question. Who's my fifth guy here? I'm struggling. I'll go with Adam Morrison. I'll go another Bobcat. And the reason being is because if it was not for Adam Morrison existing, I would not follow this team. And it would not have led me to my kind of side career here of covering and talking and writing about the Charlotte Hornets as a part-time career here. So a strange Mount Rushmore for a variety of personal reasons. But you asked me for my Mount Rushmore, and I'll go with that off the top of my head.
Can you talk about your fandom of the NBA being in Manchester? How did that come to be? And what is the relationship of the NBA, not only, in England, but also all of Europe as well? Because we've seen the NBA make an investment just in terms of putting games in different parts of the United Kingdom, Europe, especially it's all about EuroLeague. That's blown up in popularity in recent years. Kind of, what is your connection to the league, and do you think it has a chance to really grow in that part of where you're living?
Well, my connection came because I started playing basketball at school, and I wanted a basketball jersey. And my grandma lives in Montgomery, Alabama. And I visited her every summer, and I went to visit her, and I wanted to buy a basketball jersey. I went to a Reebok store because that was the kit provider at the time, and there was two jerseys: a LeBron James Cleveland Cavaliers jersey or an Adam Morrison Charlotte Bobcats jersey. And I was like, well, I know who LeBron is. That's kind of boring. Like, just buy the, that one. I'm going to go for this other player and team that I've never heard of, knew nothing about. Like, they've got to be good, right? They're in there with LeBron. Like, it's got to be someone who's, like, pretty good or a team that's decent. and that was my entryway into basketball. And I started like, well, I bought this jersey. I just want to find out more about this team. And then I started following them closely, and I won a contest to blog for the official Bobcats.com website as a 16-year-old. And then it just snowballed from there. But to the second part of your question is NBA in Europe. Look, I still don't feel that there's been like mainstream cut through here. NFL has overtaken NBA massively in this country. And I think the culture of the NBA, I don't think sits really strongly with like British culture. But then I know across the world it's absolutely exploded. And London actually lost the NBA game in 2019 that used to be hosted here to Paris and Dubai. Rumors it's going to be coming back in the next few years, which is positive. But it's fair to say the NBA kind of set their eyes in some of the markets, and that's understandable because, you know, the British market is only so big. And this generation of French players you've got coming through, all the money that is in the Middle East right now, which, you know, I'm sure the NBA will be benefiting from. So I would say it survives through more kind of like moments and clips than like fandom. I mean, there's so many games and they're on in the middle of the night. Whereas the NFL, there's like, 16 games, and they start a lot of them at like 6 p.m. European time, 7 p.m. People can watch them easily. To watch the NBA, you've got to be like some midnight sicko, or you've got to be watching League Pass the next day for 2 hours and be able to do that. And not a lot of people can do that.
How does it compare to other American forms of entertainment? Because I am a big pro wrestling fan, and I know pro wrestling has a very rich culture within the United Kingdom. And, you know, now with WWE going on Netflix, it's just in terms of distribution, that has kind of evolved in terms of how the product is viewed. And there's usually a lot of interest when the WWE comes over to the United Kingdom just for a lot of events. They haven't been there for such a long time, and then they go. I'm just very curious with the NBA. I've even heard some rumblings over the years since me being a fan of, you know, maybe putting a franchise over that has always been talked about in terms of, you know, league expansion internationally. That's just interesting. How is that the primary reason? Is this the time difference in terms of fans? This, you know, in order to watch these games, you know, you have to stay up in the middle of the night to catch them, or do you think there's a way for the NBA to maybe accommodate kind of the European fan base better, just in terms of that time difference? If they do, there's a lot more potential to, you know, garner that fan base over there.
I think time difference is a part of it. I think the other thing is like, with there being 82 games, there's just like such limited jeopardy, like night to night. And I think people would find that, you know, the playoffs and key games, that like, you want to watch something that really means something has stakes. Like people watch the Olympics and they tune in and they'll end up watching archery for 3 hours because they want to see if this person is going to win this archery match, right? And they don't know anything about the sport, but the stakes, right? It's big. It's the Olympics. The NBA just has a problem like that. The games feel a little bit meaningless. And when you like tune in and you hear that this other team was like playing in LA last night and on a back-to-back, like for a British audience, that's just like, what are we doing here? Like, this is crazy. And I think that alienates people. And then also like, there is this view that like everyone just scores every time. We don't have many sports like that where there's like constant scoring. Like, you think about football or soccer, like you play for 2 hours for like 5 or 6 moments, and that's like how our British culture generally works. And I think it's a little bit numbing with all the scoring in the NBA, where it's just like constant, and the understanding of the game isn't of a higher level either, like the education in this country. So yeah.
So that's fascinating to hear. I think a lot of what you're saying is echoed in America, just in terms of the 82 game schedule, a lot of just meaningless games. But it's interesting because it's in contrast with what I think TV rights is in terms of having more content. I mean, they can make up the difference in terms of losing fan appeal because they're making so much money on the back end with these television deals. So it's unfortunate that they don't decrease the length of games. That's really unfortunate. And also just with the scoring itself, I heard the same criticism in terms of the number of threes being taken. It's just too easy to score. It's just there's needs to be a happy medium in terms of, players really shooting a high percentage from three just because of analytics and it's necessary to win. But at the same time, it becoming kind of like NBA 2K, being able to play a video game to get the same satisfaction. There's the competition level on a nightly basis. So hopefully the NBA can kind of reach a happy medium there in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
Appreciate the time, James, for just enlightening us on just Hornets, their culture, and what they have planned for the future. Can you please let us know where they can find your work, also where your social media platforms of choice, and any projects you have for the rest of this year as well?
Yeah, so you can find me on X and on Blue Sky at British_Buzz. You can also find my podcast. We cover the Charlotte Hornets with a weekly show. It's the Hornets on SI Podcast Network. You'll be able to find that if you just search Charlotte Hornets Podcast, if anyone wants to tune in. And then I have written work as well, but you're best just to go to my X account at British_Buzz. And you'll find all the links on there to my written work. And also just I tweet out a bunch of interesting Hornet stats and stuff like that. And like I'm probably imagining not a lot of your listeners will have many Charlotte Hornets thinking people on their timeline. So if you want to round out your NBA knowledge and learn a little bit more about an often forgotten franchise, give me a follow and you won't regret it.
Yeah, please go check them out. Again, our podcast is making sure that we celebrate the entire NBA as well as the WNBA and basketball culture as a whole. So appreciate the time, James. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Justin.